Thank you so much, Brother Dyson, a fighter for justice and someone who's been passionate and aspired to great things. And the young person who has taken over for Bill Dyson representing New Haven in our state legislature is Representative Gary Winfield, who just won election in November, and it was my great honor last Wednesday to give him the oath of office. Gary, you want to just stand up and show him what a boy from the Bronx can do. The speakers and the singers were talking about a confluence of events from the past to the present. And I heard that confluence of events expressed so well, and I'm not going to take credit for coming up with it. One of my colleagues in the legislature from Bridgeport, Representative Don Clemens, said it this way: Rosa sat so that Martin could walk, so that Barack could fly. And I thought that expressed it beautifully. And so today we celebrate that confluence of events. Today, January 15th, we also celebrate the birthday of Dr. King, who would have been 79 years old. But as you know, on April 4th, 1968, he was taken away from us at 39 years old. He was a young man. And I think Dr. King knew what was coming because he said something that I think is very true about his own life, and that is that it is the quality, not the longevity, of one's life that is important. And so it's very fitting that today we celebrate some of Dr. King's legacies, and I think he leaves us 3 legacies. And the first is equality, the fight that he made all of his life for equality, and he's expressed that dream of equality in the early 1960s when he stood on the mall before our nation's capital and before hundreds of thousands of people and gave that famous "I have a dream" speech. And I have a vision of Dr. King looking down on January 20th on the mall with not hundreds of thousands of people, but looking down at millions of people, looking down and watching Barack Obama become the president of our United States. He had a dream, and part of that dream has been realized. And I think the other legacy that he left us was the legacy of our most precious civil rights that each of us has as an American, our most precious civil right. And we have many rights as Americans that we somehow and sometimes take for granted, but the most precious one, and you'd expect to hear this from the Secretary of State, is our right to make our voice heard, to let our leaders know what we want, and that is our precious right to vote. And it was Dr. King who marched and fought and died for that right so that the Voting Rights Act could be passed and every person in these United States, regardless of color, could have the right to vote. And it was a very moving day for me on October 28th, 2008, when on the deadline to register to vote, I decided to go out to the Registrar of Voters office, which is not far from the state capitol in the city of Hartford, to see what I had been hearing was happening all across our state, that people were rushing to get to their town hall, to their city hall, by the deadline to register to vote so that they could cast their vote in the very historic election that we had on November 4th. And I saw so many people lined up. You couldn't even get in the door of the town hall registrar's office because there were so many people there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, people who had left work early, people who had walked, rode the bus, driven their car to get there. And I stood along with several other registrars and their assistants because there were so many people I felt I had to help. And as soon as I would get one card to a person, another would be filled out. And I put out a voter registration card for a man who was in his late 50s. And for the first time, he was so proud that he decided it was important enough that he sign up to vote for the very first time so that he could make his voice heard. So we have the opportunity every election to honor the legacy of Dr. King by voting, because that is our opportunity to express our civil right and to express our voice and to make it heard. And I think the final legacy that Dr. King has left for us is the legacy of public service. And I love serving the people of the state of Connecticut. And I often think of something that Dr. King said, which is that everyone can be great because everybody can serve. So the only question is, how will you serve? How will you make this day a better day for yourself and for others? How will you make this city better? How will you make our state better? How will you make our country and our world better? That is the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. And by the way, for the benefit of our young people, that is going to be the legacy of Barack Obama, because throughout his campaign, throughout his career, he served the public, and he will continue to serve in this very, very difficult time. So let us continue to honor Dr. King by voting, by fighting for justice every day, and by public service. I thank you all so much. It's been wonderful sharing this morning and this afternoon with you. God bless.
I want to thank the Secretary of State for those comments. They were just quite appropriate comments to be made. I want to thank her for that. Reverend Lee, next, and the offering comes after that.
Bless the Lord. Amen. I am happy in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in a great American, in whose symbolic shadow we stand today. He signed the Emancipation Decree, came as a great beacon of life hope to the million of the Negro slaves who had been seized into the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long nights to their captivities. But 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manicures of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro, he still lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of the vast ocean of the material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro, he is still language in the corners of American society, and he finds himself in exile in his own land. So we have come here to our nation capital to dramatize this shameful condition. In a sense, we have come here to our nation capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words to the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were simply signing a promissory note in which every American would fall in. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights to life and to liberty in the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as the citizens of color is concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro peoples a bad check. A check which has been returned. A check which has come back. A check which has been marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vault of opportunity of this nation. So we have come here to our nation capital to cash this check. This check which upon demands will give us the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come here to this hollow spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of the hour. This is no time for us to engage into the luxury of cooling off, nor to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy. Now is the time for us to rise up from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksand of racial and injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal if the nation would overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent, it will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but it is a beginning. And to those of you who hope the Negro needs to blow off steam, is now going to be content. And there will be a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwind or revolt will continue to shake the foundations of this nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But there is something that I must say to my peoples today, to those of you who stand here on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of us gaining our rightful place, let us not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggles on the high planes of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, let us rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. This marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community, it must not lead us to a distrust of all white peoples. For many of our white brethren, as an evidence of their presence here today, many have come to realize that their destiny is truly tied up with our destiny. Many have come to realize that their freedom is inexcusably bound with our freedom, and we are not alone. Therefore, we cannot walk alone. But as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn around. Now there are those who are asking the devotees to the civil rights, when will we be satisfied? Well,